Hi everyone, my name is Jackie, and yeah, I'm a guy. Although you probably can't say that judging from my appearance. The thing is that my working day has just ended, and I did not have time to change my clothes. Hmm, I guess things haven't become clearer, have they? Yes, I admit, my uniform looks quite unusual, but trust me, this is the only disadvantage in my work. I already got used to my dress and high heels. I'm sure you are intrigued. Definitely watch this video till the end to find out how I managed to get my dream job, albeit with some weird peculiarities. It all started out in quite a trivial manner. I graduated from high school, went to college, moved from my parents' house to a dormitory, and started living the life that I had always dreamed of. There was no control from my mom and dad. I was doing what I wanted, eating what I wanted, was out late, and sometimes even did not come back to the dormitory during the whole night. There were parties, wild nights, and a student fraternity. Everything was cool. My parents supported me by sending money several times a month. I didn't work and didn't see any point in looking for a job because when I suddenly ran out of money, I called my dad and my bank card balance immediately became positive. The first year of studies passed unnoticed. It was the best time in my life. At that moment, I really understood my parents, who said that student years were the coolest and most memorable period. After my summer holidays, an unpleasant surprise, or even two of them, awaited me. Firstly, my parents told me that I was already a grown up and a mature guy, which meant that I could easily find some part time job to work in my free time and provide for myself. On the other hand, I understood that it was impudent for me to depend financially on my mom and dad, but on the other hand, I hadn't ever worked a day in my life. What should I do? Where should I go? Who will hire a person without any experience who can do nothing, to be honest? It would have been silly to be mad at my parents. After all, they have a lot of worries, as my younger brother and sister were still studying at school. But I also can't say that I went to classes in a good mood. At least many of my friends from the dormitory already had part time jobs in their first year, which meant that they could help me find a job as well. But when I came to college, I learned about the second surprise. Just before the beginning of the academic year, by some ridiculous accident, a fire broke out in our dormitory, and it was exactly on the floor where I lived. The college asked us to find a temporary place to live while renovations were being made. Since repair works involved the unplanned expenses, college management was not even ready to compensate us for the rental costs. While in the first year I was satisfied with my life, the second year began with a real hell for me as I had to look for housing and work at the same time. Of course, when my parents learned that I would have to live in a rented apartment for a couple of months, they agreed to help me financially, but I understood that this money would not be enough for me to lead my usual life. The issue with housing was resolved very quickly. Together with other guys with whom we were neighbors in the dormitory, we rented an apartment near the college. 6 people settled in 2 small rooms, but this was common for us. It was like in the dormitory. The situation with work was much worse. Firstly, this was because for a student in general, it is difficult to find some part time work with a flexible schedule. Secondly, I rejected everything that my friends offered me. Why did I do this? Well, I did it just because I did not imagine myself as a loader, a pizza delivery man, or a waiter in a fast food restaurant. In fact, I did not understand how it would feel not to cuddle with my dear bed or have a rest after classes, but go to work instead in the snowy or rainy weather. That's just horrible. To be honest, I postponed the search as long as I could, apparently hoping for some miracle to happen. I justified myself by a cold, a heavy workload at college or by something else. But once my dad refused to top up the balance when I called to ask him to do this. He said that this month they already sent me larger than usual amount and just couldn't afford to give me more. I had no choice. So I bought the first available newspaper with vacancies from a print kiosk, opened it at a random page, pointed it with my finger without looking at it, and dialed the phone number that was indicated here. Why did I do this? It's just that otherwise the job search would definitely be postponed again, and I would come up with a million excuses for myself. It's funny, but fate chose a job of a cleaner for me. And of course, I would not have agreed to it if I had not seen how much money the employer promised to pay. The salary was almost $4,000 a month. And this was for an 8-hour working day, while others, for example, office employees, worked 12-hour shifts for the same money. I decided that I was definitely lucky, as I pointed to such an option. I would not have noticed it myself. I even would not have thought to look at the page with service personnel vacancies. So I called the indicated number and talked to the manager, Mrs. Kim. She asked me a couple of questions and then invited me to a personal meeting. When I looked at the address of my place of work, I decided that I would do my best to make it mine, as it was located really close to the college. This was very convenient. A small 3-story building didn't really strike the eye. As for me, I never paid attention to it, passing by it hundreds of times and did not think about what exactly was inside it. There were neither signs nor lights in the building. The windows were covered with thick blinds. There was a single heavy iron door. I knocked it 3 times, as agreed, and was invited inside. When I got there, I almost immediately realized what kind of place it was. This was a private and apparently very elite nightclub. There was a small hall with sofas and tables, a dance floor, a bar counter, poles, and stairs leading to the upper floors, where the VIP rooms were probably hidden behind the doors. At that point, it became clear why even an ordinary cleaner received such a salary there. Apparently, the establishment brought excellent income. The tall security guy who met me at the entrance took me to the manager of the club. On the phone, Mrs. Kim promised that she would explain to me the essence of the work and my responsibilities in person. But she started the conversation by setting one condition. If I planned to work for them, I was supposed to learn to keep my mouth shut, because everything that happened in the club was to remain inside it. Clients of the club were famous and influential people who did not need any problems at all. The club was open every day from 8 p.m. until 4 a.m. At this time, according to the schedule where I was going to have 2 working days and then 2 days off, I needed to be present at the club so that at the very first request of the administrator, I would be able to quickly clean the VIP rooms or the hall if some emergency happened there. The manager said that there are days when the VIP rooms have to be cleaned every half hour, but sometimes the administrator calls the cleaner only 2 to 3 times for the whole night, and the rest of the time, the worker may sleep without any interruptions. Despite the night schedule, I was more than okay with all the working conditions. I even felt anticipation and was eager to take up my duties. That same night, I had my first shift. From 8 to 11 p.m., it was calm there. Rarely guests were sitting at tables, talking and drinking. It was even somehow quiet for a nightclub. But at midnight, I changed my opinion. An entertaining show began, and the hall was immediately filled with numerous visitors. There were women and men, both young and old ones. There were really quite a few famous people among them, so I realized that Mrs. Kim's warnings were not a joke. During the night, I managed to work and sleep. I can't say that cleaning VIP rooms after guests is a very pleasant experience, but for such a salary, it was possible to put up with it. Of course, I lied to my friends. I said that I got a job of a night security guard in a jewelry store, and they easily believed it. After a couple of weeks, I became friends with all the staff of the club. Almost all of them were students who were looking for a part-time job and found such a profitable type of place. And while some people might think that working in such an institution was immoral, I did not care at all. I received a large amount of money into my account every week and was happy. I even told my parents that I no longer needed their financial support, as I could provide for myself. And probably, I would have continued to work as a cleaner if not for one case. The administrators of the club, who met and saw off the guests, also worked according to the schedule with 2 working days after 2 weekends. Caitlin worked with me more often than others. We were about the same age and even somewhat similar in terms of appearance. Some people thought that we were siblings. And then one day, Caitlin did not show up for work during her shift. Of course, the manager immediately started calling and looking for her, but she was not available on her phone. She called another administrator, but it turned out she was out of town together with her parents. It was impossible to leave the club without an administrator. That's why, after looking at me carefully, Mrs. Kim offered me to engage in a little adventure, namely to pretend to be a girl and stand at the reception. First of all, Caitlin and I were similar, as I said before, which meant that no one would notice the substitution, especially if I wore a wig and a dress. I've never been tall, nor had broad shoulders, which was also a positive aspect in this situation. Secondly, at that time, I had already worked in the club for a couple of months and knew perfectly well what administrators were supposed to do. This meant that I could quickly find my bearings, and we would not have to keep customers waiting. I had some doubts, but Mrs. Kim said she would pay me $1,000 for the shift, so I immediately agreed. I was terribly uncomfortable wearing a short dress and high heels. The hair from the wig was constantly getting into my mouth, and false eyelashes prevented me from blinking normally. But even under such conditions, I did an excellent job performing the duties of an administrator, smiling to guests in a friendly manner and escorting them to the tables and VIP rooms. When the working day, or rather night, ended, I could hardly stand on my feet, but Mrs. Kim praised me and said that I had done well. Also, as strange as it may sound, she didn't mind if I became an administrator, but to be honest, I still had to pretend to be a girl because this was one of the club's rules. I wanted to take some time to think, but sly Mrs. Kim wrote on a napkin the salary that I could receive as an administrator, so I agreed again. I've never dreamed of such money. Basically, from that day on, I changed my mop and cleaner's uniform for pretty dresses and high heels. This may seem strange to some people, but I'm really satisfied with my work, and I love it very much. I can't tell my friends about it or invite them to the club, but I have enough money to rent a luxurious apartment and throw a party there. Of course, looking at my standard of living, many people do not believe that the salary of a night guard is my only income, but I'm just laughing it off in response. I'm definitely not going to reveal the truth. My parents also ask where I got the money for expensive clothes, a rented apartment, and the latest smartphone model, but I also lie to them that I work in several places, having enough time to study. They would definitely be shocked after finding out where their son actually works. Recently, Mrs. Kim said that she planned to talk with the owner of the club about my job as an administrator, but without dressing up as a pretty girl. Many clients praise me and sometimes leave a tip for my smile or polite communication. Tell us, would you agree to change gender to get your dream job with a huge salary? Or do you think that I'm a freak obsessed with money and ready for all sorts of crazy things for this?
Hello, everyone. My name's Grace. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that I still don't want to remember. Of course, it's been a long time, but I still remember the eyes of my classmates when they saw it. Perhaps my story will surprise you a little. Well, I must say, my family isn't quite an ordinary one, and maybe that's because this story happened to me. Okay, first things first. Make sure you watch this video to the end. My mom and dad met when they were in high school. Well, they went to school together, and one day they just started dating. Everyone said they were a sweet couple. After school, my mom went to study at a local college. She wanted to become a pastry chef. However, my dad chose a very surprising option. He wanted to become a teacher in a Catholic school, and he didn't want to teach some ordinary subjects like history or geography. He wanted to teach kids the law of God. As my grandma later told me, my dad once had a dream where a voice said to him this was his life mission. My mom was also quite surprised by my dad's decision, but they loved each other and stayed together. When they both graduated from college, they got married right away, and then they had me. They looked like a perfect family from the outside. They met at school, had a long-term relationship, got married, and had a beautiful daughter. Mom and Dad were very happy. I grew up surrounded by their love. I still remember how we all went to the park together for picnics on Saturdays when my dad finished work. But all this changed when I was 5. By that time, my mom was already known as the best pastry chef in our small town. Once, a VIP customer ordered a cake for his birthday party from her, and it was a great honor for her to make it. Besides, he promised her an excellent reward. The only problem was that this huge cake wouldn't survive after transportation, so my mom had to prepare it right at the customer's home. Of course, my mom agreed. She lived for almost a week in a posh mansion, located in a beautiful suburban area. I don't know exactly what happened out there, but my mom never came home. Well, to be exact, she returned only once, and only to pack her things and leave. I tried to get the details from my dad, but he just explained to me with a sad smile that my mom had found another family and she wouldn't live with us anymore. Later on, when I grew up, I found out the details from my mom's friend. As it turned out, she was my mom's best friend. My mom met the owner's brother in that rich mansion, and they fell in love with each other right away. He suggested she move away to the capital with him and start a new life there, and my mom agreed. She left both her husband and daughter and her favorite job. My dad was totally surprised when she told him about it. He thought she was always happy with him. He planned to have a second kid with her, a son or maybe a second daughter, and live even happier together. Apparently, this was only in his dreams. My mom left. She changed her phone number, and she burned all the bridges from her past life forever. Dad and I were alone. Of course, at first, I cried all the time. I called my mom. I asked her to take me with her, but over time, it passed. I accepted that my family now is just me and Dad, and we don't need anyone else. My dad raised me to be a strict and reserved girl. I can say I was a Christian role model of obedience, humility, and hard work. I studied diligently. I sang in the church choir. And after school, I often helped my dad when he was busy with charity work. My classmates were constantly bragging with their new gadgets and toys. In contrast, I had a simple smartphone, and I read books in all my spare time. During breaks, my classmates discussed the news on the internet, their favorite bloggers, new series, or viral videos, but I couldn't keep up the conversation. I use the internet strictly 2 hours a day, and that was only to find information I needed for my studies. My dad had been saying ever since I was a little girl that there was too much cruelty, violence, and vulgarity on the internet, so he always personally checked which websites I visited and my Google search queries. Now, I understand that despite I read a lot and I studied well, my knowledge was even more limited than that of my classmates in many ways, and this was also one of the reasons why I want to tell you today about my situation. I was 14 then. For as long as I can remember, I've always been a very thin girl. No matter how much I ate, it didn't affect my figure. Perhaps that's why I often got sick and caught a cold. Dad didn't like to treat me with pills. He believed any medicine is just a chemistry that causes more harm instead of doing any good to the body. So, even when I had a cold, I just drank some herbal tea with honey. I ate more fruit and jam. Anyway, my dad treated me with folk medicine. One morning, I woke up to make breakfast for my dad as usual and then go to school. I usually went to bed early, so I got up in the morning fresh and well rested. But that day, I barely got myself out of bed. My whole body ached as if I had a fever, and I felt lethargic. Thinking that it was just another cold, I didn't bother my dad and didn't tell him about my condition. I drank some herbal concoction that was supposed to relieve cold symptoms. Then I went to school. Usually, I felt better after an hour or two, but this time, my temperature didn't go down, and I felt exhausted. In addition, my stomach started aching a lot. I started remembering everything I had eaten yesterday, because the symptoms were very similar to food poisoning, but I couldn't find any cause. Besides, I didn't feel sick, and the pain in my stomach was still a little different. It was very twisting. Even breathing was painful for me. I knew that going to the school nurse wasn't a good option. She'd probably just give me another pill, and then I'll get a reprimand from my dad. So I just had to endure it while carefully listening to the teacher. But she already noticed something was wrong with me. That day, the last lesson was PE. I didn't even imagine how I would be able to do anything in class in such a physical state. I changed into sportswear, but I couldn't even get up from the bench in the locker room because my stomach painfully cramped. As bad luck would have it, that day the teacher planned to hit the qualifying sports standard, and it meant it was impossible to take sick leave. Besides, he'd probably send me to the school nurse. Again, I didn't want that. So, after gritting my teeth, I somehow made my way to the stadium. Even though I felt like I was going to faint at any second, I was sure I would definitely not pass the standards that day. I could barely walk, let alone run. Some of my classmates even approached me and asked what was wrong with me because I didn't look good all day long. I thanked them for their concern, but explained that I just had the flu and that it would definitely go away tomorrow. I wish it was a flu, in fact. When we were all at the start, I was waiting for my turn to run. Suddenly, I felt something wet between my legs. This has never happened to me before, and I had no idea what it could be. I kept delaying the moment when it was my turn to run, so I was the last one with 2 other girls. I don't know where I found the strength in me, but I still started running. I even made my way to the finish line. I was standing there, trying to get my breathing back to normal. That moment, I already felt my legs getting more and more wet. Suddenly, I heard one of my classmates screaming, "Look, she's bleeding!" It took me a moment to understand what she was saying about me, but when the girls next to me gasped and pointed at my pants, I looked down and noticed a huge blood stain. To say I was afraid is an understatement. I was just speechless, and I didn't know what to do. Call a doctor? Run home? Ask someone for help? Or what? The boys tactfully turned their heads away, and the teacher ran off to get the school doctor, and the girls' faces were still a little confused. Only one of them, Kate, laughed out loud, calling us all alarmists, and saying that nothing terrible had happened. It's just, "Looks like our Drabby is finally grown up." I knew sometimes they called me that behind my back because of my lifestyle, but now I was more interested not in my offensive nickname, but in Kate's reaction. So she knew what exactly was wrong with me, right? I asked her, almost crying, to explain what was happening to me, But she laughed even louder and suggested I Google it myself. Normally, mothers tell these things to girls. Oops, sorry, I forgot. You don't have one. Ha ha ha, she said sarcastically, and I rushed to the girls' locker room afterwards. I quickly changed my bloody sportswear and rushed home. I could feel the hot liquid running between my legs. I continued to bleed even when I was in the shower. I felt dirty, and I was also so terribly embarrassed in front of all of my classmates who saw me in such a state. So, when I got home, the first thing I did was rush to the bathroom. My school uniform was bloody too, and I had no idea how to stop it. I put my clothes in the washing machine and went to the shower. The amount of blood on my clothes scared me. How in the world can a person lose so much blood and still be conscious? I don't know how much time I spent in the shower. I only came to my senses when my dad knocked on the door and asked me if I was all right, because he had already come home from work and he was waiting for me to cook him dinner. I somehow washed up and cleaned myself up. I took a clean towel, rolled it up, and put it in my bikini zone so that I wouldn't get these clothes dirty too. Of course, it wasn't convenient, but it helped a little to stop the bleeding. I told my dad I was just a little sick. I quickly cooked him dinner and went to my room. I remembered the words of my classmate and her answer to my question what was wrong with me. She said I could easily Google it, so when I was alone, I immediately turned on the computer and started. I knew that my dad might see my searches later. I was afraid something bad might happen to me, so I tried to use indirect searches. I don't remember exactly what I entered in the search bar, but the first result made me cry. Of course, I understood there was nothing good in such strong bleeding, but I didn't think this was a sign of a deadly disease. How could it be? I'm only 14. Why did this happen to me? How would my dad live without me? All these scary questions rolled in my head. I cried my eyes out, not knowing what to do. I was really confused. Maybe I should go to the hospital. But of course, the treatment of such a disease would cost a lot of money, and my family doesn't have that amount. Besides, knowing my dad, he would definitely be against any medical treatment. And finally, what's the point if I'm going to die anyway? I couldn't sleep a wink all night. In the end, I decided I would pretend I went to school, and then I would just wander around somewhere for half a day. First, because I was ashamed to look my classmates in the eye, and second, the bleeding didn't stop. So I just changed one towel after another, throwing the dirty ones in the trash. I hoped I would feel better the next day, but my condition hadn't changed. All the same fatigue, lethargy, temperature. I barely had the strength to make breakfast for my dad and pretend everything was fine so he wouldn't worry. And then I left the house. I got on the first bus that came along and went to the final destination. I remember that just recently I was here with my father, and there was a park nearby where we arranged a charity concert. I reached the park, sat down on a bench, and started crying. By the end of the day, he would find out I skipped school, because the teacher would probably call him, and my dad would want to know the reason for skipping. And what would I tell him? I'm sorry, Dad, I'm dying, but I didn't know how to tell you. Something like this? Or what? This is ridiculous. Apparently, I fell asleep right on the bench, probably because I didn't sleep all night long. I woke up because someone was insistently shaking my shoulder. When I opened my eyes, I saw a woman. Her face was troubled. She asked me if I was all right and if I needed any help. I couldn't say anything to her, and when I got up to leave the park, I found there was a bloody trace on the bench. The woman also saw it. She gasped loudly and immediately grabbed my arm, telling me I still needed help. Anyway, I don't know why I trusted her. I probably saw in her eyes some compassion, but I told her everything as it was, about my condition, about the bleeding, and about the fact I didn't know how to return home. The woman listened carefully and then asked me how old I was and if I'd ever heard anything about having a period. I didn't lie and say I didn't know what she was talking about. She was very surprised and then patiently started explaining everything to me. This was just the girl's sexual system functioning. When the body believes it's ready for sex and pregnancy, some changes occur, and then menstruation starts. This happens once a month with every woman, and this was the indicator that showed I wasn't sick, but quite the opposite. I was totally healthy and my body's clockwork. The woman immediately took me to the pharmacy, where she showed me what hygiene items are needed these days. It turned out there are some tools that are much more effective than towels. She was very surprised that my mom didn't tell me about such things, but I immediately answered I lived with my dad, who was unable to have such conversations with me. That woman, Mrs. White, sincerely sympathized with me and gave me her phone number in case anything bad happened again. She said I could always contact her and ask some questions about my health or the female body functioning. I immediately went home, took a shower, and decided I would talk to my dad tonight and tell him everything as it was. I breathed a sigh of relief that I wasn't terminally ill, and somehow I could manage with one epic fail day at school. The only thing that bothered me was how to go back to school and look my classmates in the eye. I was so disgraced, and I showed my ignorance. I didn't know some trivial and everyday things, but it turned out I was wrong to worry. On my return, everyone tactfully pretended nothing had happened, and they never remembered about that incident later. My dad and I agreed we would always talk to each other about everything, even if the topic would be awkward or delicate. Tell me, do you have any embarrassing and awkward topics you just can't discuss with your parents? How are you trying to discuss them with your mom and dad? Write your answers in the comments. Hey everyone, my name's Amanda, and I'm wearing a mask not because I'm sick or afraid of catching a dangerous virus. The fact is, this mask helps me to hide one thing on my face. Sometimes it scares the people I talk to. Sometimes it causes laughter, surprise, and of course, a lot of questions. How? Why? And so on. At first, I didn't know the answers to these questions myself, and I went through a lot of doctors. And when we did manage to determine the cause, not only me and my family were shocked, but even the doctors themselves. Such a case was the first one in their practice. Are you ready to find out what's wrong with me? Then I removed the mask. Yes, I do have a real beard growing on my face. And the harder I try to get rid of it, the darker, thicker, and faster it grows. I can talk about it calmly now, because to some extent, I've come to terms with it and got used to it. But at first, every look in the mirror brought tears to my eyes. I even got rid of almost all the mirrors in my apartment, in order not to get upset all the time. But first things first, you don't think I was born like this, do you? I was just an ordinary girl. Dark skin, dark brown eyes, thick black hair. Thanks to my parents for such an appearance. I always attracted everyone's attention and got a lot of compliments. I graduated from high school and went to study in a prestigious college located in the capital. I specifically chose a college which was far from my hometown because I thought I was already quite an adult and I wanted to live an independent life. I discussed this issue with my parents, and together we decided I would rent an apartment and not live in a dorm, as I was not used to living with someone else. Of course, this meant I would have to work, but I wasn't afraid of such difficulties, exactly up to the moment I encountered them. I studied, then ran to work, then came back home and tried to do my homework, and so on, day after day. I didn't even have time to eat properly. My main meal was fast food, or ready-made supermarket lunch, which I quickly heated up in the microwave and ate. It's not surprising after a while, I started having some stomach problems. But I didn't have enough time to see a doctor, so I just hoped it would pass. After a while, it really did pass, so I just continued my rat race, grabbing food from KFC and supermarkets, which were nearby. But then, something happened, and it didn't fit into my personal plans. I started noticing one of my college mates liked me. Harry often asked me some questions, bought me coffee, and sat next to me when I was studying for my exams in the library. I didn't know how to react, because I'd never been in a relationship before. I was not used to really bothering about my life, so I decided to just let it go, let things flow their own way. I had to adjust a couple of weeks later, when the college holidays started, and Harry asked me out on a date. I didn't mind, and we agreed to go to the ice rink and spend Sunday afternoon in the fresh air. Everything was fine. It was snowing. We were holding hands, spinning on the ice. Soft romantic music was playing. Anyway, it was so charming. At some point, we stopped to catch our breath, and he leaned toward me, clearly intending to kiss me, and I closed my eyes. But for some reason, this kiss never happened, and when I opened my eyes, I saw some confusion and surprise on his face. "Are you growing a mustache?" Harry asked me. I didn't even know what he was talking about right away. Mustache? What mustache? Me? No, sir. This will never happen. Of course, I was immediately confused and said I needed to go to the ladies' room. And there, I took out a small mirror and looked at myself. Of course, I noticed the thin hair above my lip. But what about the mustache? However, in the mirror, I saw the thing that surprised Harry so much. I did have a strip of hair above my upper lip that looked suspiciously like a mustache, but it hadn't been there this morning. My date with Harry ended up in a mess because I was going home too fast. On my way, I bought a special depilatory cream to get rid of the so-called mustache. I would never have thought such a reason would ruin my first date. I think anyone will laugh at my story, but it was getting worse every day. First I used a cream, and then I bought a trimmer. Then I started going to some special procedures and beauty salons. But the more I struggled with my facial hair, the faster it reappeared. Over time, a beard added to my mustache. Can you imagine the shock of other people when they saw a girl with light stubble? So I had to wear a mask. There were whispers behind my back. It was very unpleasant and offensive. I just didn't know what to do. I shared the problem with my mom, and she immediately sent me to the doctor. The therapist shook her head, puzzled, and advised me to see an endocrinologist, a hormone specialist. And now the endocrinologist said I came to the right place, because such a problem is clearly the result of a hormones violation. She said I probably had too much of the male hormone testosterone in my body. But, of course, any diagnosis should be confirmed by tests and examinations, which I was prescribed in large numbers. I had to spend a lot of money, but then I didn't care about expenses. My main goal was to find out the reason why I looked like a bad man parody. As a result, my diagnosis was confirmed. It turned out that my adrenal glands were disrupted. These are the endocrine glands. Because of this disorder, the adrenal glands produce much more testosterone hormone, which is completely unnecessary for the female body. From this, I started to grow a beard, like the most brutal macho. The doctor said this can be fixed with pills and following a special diet. I would have done anything to get rid of that beard. But time passed. Neither the pills nor the diet helped. And then doctors were already seriously thinking, what's wrong with me? They started to find out in detail everything about my lifestyle, habits, and home environment. And who would have thought that the cause of all my troubles was hiding in my kitchen? And you know what it is? Plastic utensils. But how is this possible? The doctors themselves were in shock. It turned out the use of plastic dishes, and especially the use of food heated in such dishes, is dangerous for our health. Styrene, a toxic substance, is used in the production of plastic tableware. Accumulating in the body, sooner or later, styrene stops the adrenal glands from working capacity, and as a result, they start producing a large amount of the testosterone hormone. So, this is how my love of ready-made food and disposable tableware reacted. In fact, it's necessary to warn you that you may face such consequences yourself. Of course, after I found out about the reason for my beard growth, I immediately and drastically changed my diet and bought good home food for eating. Now I'm undergoing treatment, and I notice every day my beard is growing slower. I'm sure there will come a happy day when I will wake up and not see a trace of it in the mirror. Tell me, do you often eat ready-made food from supermarkets? Do you heat food in plastic dishes or containers? Maybe you're smarter than me, and know you shouldn't do this. Share your answers and stories in the comments below this video. I hope my story has taught you something. Hello everyone, my name's Ashley. I'm an actress, and recently I literally woke up famous. Well, I just filmed one series, but this popularity played a cruel joke on me because I almost lost everything I had. How did it all happen? It just turned out my parents had been lying to me all my life, hiding what I always had. Well, okay, first things first. Make sure you watch this story to the end to find out what really happened to me. As long as I can remember, my parents raised me to be the perfect daughter who can do anything. I won't say they were too strict with me, but I always felt like they were very demanding. I always did more than other kids. While other kids were playing outside together, I had tutors and learned Japanese and Chinese. When my peers were bruising their knees, learning to ride a bike or rollerblade, I was learning to play the piano or had solfeggiato lessons in music school. Since my parents were afraid I might fall and get hurt during some active games, they forbade me to play with other kids on the playground or participate in sports competitions. I thought my parents were just very caring and anxious. That's why they were afraid of my injuries. They regularly took me to different doctors. Plus, they always checked if I ate the right and healthy food only. Our family dentist once told me I had a bad bite, and my parents immediately spent a fortune to make me have a perfect smile. At 9, I discovered that my eyesight was rapidly deteriorating, and I would have to wear glasses. But Mom and Dad didn't want to put up with it, so they even took me to another country for surgery. Anyway, I grew up to be a really perfect kid. Both my appearance and my mind were perfect. Foreign languages, music school, drama classes, even ballet. Now when I remember everything I did then, I just can't make out how I managed to cope with it all at the same time. It's clear that having such a load with studies and stuff, I didn't have enough time or even energy to contradict my parents in anything or do some pranks. Therefore, I was also perfect in behavior. Anyway, I was a role model for other kids. At 10, my parents sent me to a modeling agency. At that moment, I understood why my mom had always been so afraid of any injuries, and why she cared so much about my appearance. They took only kids with a perfect appearance as models, who would be shot for commercials for some cool brands. And I was practically a perfect doll. I was nice and obedient. I did whatever anyone said to me. So many photographers and stylists always created some new images for me for different photo shoots and videos. Probably, my parents planned a modeling career for me from the very beginning. I learned foreign languages to communicate freely in different countries. I had good acting skills to act well in front of cameras. The only thing I missed was my height. When I was a kid, everyone hoped I would grow up and be a star of all the world's runways, being 6 feet tall. But when I was 15, everyone understood that 5 feet was my maximum. Of course, I could forget about the runway. Despite the fact they still invited me to shoot for commercials nonstop, my mom was very upset. One evening, I even heard her crying, talking to my dad and blaming some stupid jeans for everything. That was strange, by the way, because my dad was very tall. He even played for his college basketball team. And my mom was taller than any woman I knew. Besides, I heard from my grandma that my mom also had a modeling career. But once she got injured, and then they started refusing her everywhere, that's why she quit and started studying law. So my mom just wanted me to fulfill her dream ever since I was a kid. That's why I had to study and practice so hard. And I almost fulfilled her dream. I started thinking what I would do if the advertisers suddenly lost interest in me as a model. So I was about to finish school. We had booklets from different colleges and universities at our school. I carefully studied all the information there and decided I would become a doctor or a veterinarian. I always wanted to help people and be helpful. Yes, and I loved animals very much, though I never had my own pets. My parents didn't allow me to have a dog or a cat. Anyway, I decided I should talk to my parents before I applied to colleges and universities I had chosen. Of course, they strongly disagreed with my choice. My mom almost fainted, shouting they didn't invest so much money and effort in my appearance and education, so that I later became an ordinary doctor. She said it was very stupid for such a beautiful girl like me to hide in a doctor's coat. We argued for a long time, but in the end, they sent the documents to the college that they considered necessary and right for me. And that's how I became a student at the Tisch School of the Arts in New York. This is one of the coolest and most prestigious ones in America. There are many TV and movie stars among the graduates. We had no connections with anyone there, so I was even afraid to imagine what my parents had to do to get me there. Did I really want to study there? No. But over time, I got involved, and I even liked to go to the classes and talk with my classmates. And then my mom came up with another idea. She decided going to college wasn't enough for me. If I really wanted to achieve something in my life, I should start thinking about my career right now. That's how we came up with Hollywood. I started visiting endless castings and auditions. I played some small parts in series. They shot me for advertising. I participated in various shows. Moreover, sometimes I thought my mom absolutely did not care where exactly I would act. She always said something about a breakthrough, about being spotted, being in the right place, in the right time, meeting the right people. And you know, Mom was right. Once I was playing a cameo part in one of the series. I made friends with an actress who starred in it. Well, I happened to help her in one awkward situation. She treated me to a cup of coffee as a reward. We started talking, and it turned out we had a lot in common. Anyway, over time, we became best friends during shooting. I was constantly flashing in her Instagram because we played together. Some people even started to recognize me in the streets. Thanks to my new friend, I got to a new casting. This time, I was trying for the main female role, not for a cameo, like I always did. It was a series about a girl whose parents died because of vampires. So she decided to hunt down all the vampires and take revenge on them, pretending to be an ordinary journalist. Ironically, she falls in love with a vampire and so on. Anyway, the plot wasn't something extraordinary, but the producers strongly wanted to find a no-name actress for the main part. They wanted to make a new star shine, so to speak. The part of the vampire lover took a young actor who was already known at that time. Of course, I was very worried before the casting. I didn't want to let my friend down, or disappoint my parents, who were thrilled when they found out about such a chance. Apparently, all the acting classes weren't in vain, because among the hundreds of applicants, they chose me as a vampire hunter. Wow. I was so happy. For the first time in my life, I felt like a fish in the water. I knew I did acting and all this stuff just for the sake of my parents, and I got to this casting only because my actress friend recommended me. But I got there. I was where I needed to be. I was willing so much to try myself as a vampire hunter. I had to take a sabbatical at the School of Arts because it was impossible to combine shooting and studying. But I can't say my parents were upset. After all, the world knows a lot of successful actors who barely graduated even from high school, let alone college. I'll be frank with you, the filming process wasn't an easy game. This was my first main part, so I had no idea how many takes I had to do to shoot a single scene that was just a couple of minutes long. It was so exhausting. When I was filming for a cameo, they shot everything from the first take. It only took 2 hours max, and I went home happy. But there, I had to spend almost 15 hours every day on the set. I only had breaks for food, bathroom, and sleep. It was very exhausting, but I knew all my efforts wouldn't be in vain, and I sincerely hoped the series would be successful, and all the viewers would appreciate my acting talent. I must say, I was strongly afraid of the film critics, and the audience who would not accept me as a new star. I've heard many stories that new actors often get lost on the screen, in contrast to their popular and successful colleagues. But both the director and my partner always praised me, so I was hoping for a big success. I was looking forward to the series becoming available for viewing. When the first episode came out, I stayed up almost all night long, reading the comments and different posts on social media. Of course, there was some criticism and negative feedback, but most of the viewers liked both the plot and the main characters. I fell asleep only in the morning. I had a wake-up call from my manager, who was exclaiming to me that journalists were torturing his phone and tearing him into pieces, wanting to talk to me or take an interview. That's how I literally woke up being famous. And there were a lot of articles on the net, like, "Who's that mysterious beauty Ashley?" I had a lot of interviews and press conferences. The audience wanted to know more details of my life. But journalists always need a sensation. One day, my parents and I met the representatives of some newspapers to discuss some details of my biography. The journalists were glad I grew up being a very calm and obedient child, which meant I had no dark past. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Just after the meeting, my co-star and I went for a few more interviews, so I turned off my phone. When I turned it back on, I panicked. Hundreds of missed calls from my parents' friends and unknown numbers. I had dozens of direct messages on social media. Each of them had a link to an article with the title, "This is how you get the main parts in movies." I immediately realized something was wrong here, because the good articles never started with such words. Anyway, it was an article in some yellow paper that said many people were surprised how they took an unknown young actress to shoot in a rather promising series with a successful and popular actor. And after digging into my past, they found a very interesting fact. I used to work in escort services. I accompanied rich and powerful men to social parties, business meetings, and on some business trips. Of course, this article also mentioned I provided some other services, so to speak, that were a more personal nature. And that was how I got the main role. One of my wealthy customers just bought it for me, because in fact, I was a mediocre actress. I would probably have laughed in the face of the journalist who wrote this nonsense, but I was shocked by the photos that were attached to the article. There was real me there, accompanying various businessmen at some beau monde parties. But wait, how could this be possible anyway? I mean, I'm sane. I don't have schizophrenia or something. I remember perfectly well all the people I had contact with, and I didn't have any time for such nonsense. My manager immediately came up to me and said, "We must make an official statement. Otherwise, a great scandal would spread all over the internet, and it wouldn't be stopped." Our version was like this. It wasn't me in these photos, just a girl who looked like me. That's it. But journalists immediately demanded that I prove where I was and what I was doing on the days when the events captured in the photos took place. It turned out I had shootings or interviews at that time. Many people from the crew or other journalists could confirm that. I came home at night. I was too tired and exhausted. Who in the world would ever think my successful career would have such a great start and such a bad ending? But that wasn't it. When I went into the kitchen, I thought I was sleeping and watching some stupid dream because my parents and another me were sitting at the table. How could this be possible? Noticing my reaction, my doppelganger grinned angrily and said, "Well, hello, my little sister." My little sister? What the heck was she talking about? I immediately looked at Mom and Dad, begging them to explain what was going on here. And for the first time in my life, I saw terrible sadness and guilt in their eyes. My mom asked me to sit down, and then she started the story. It all happened 20 years ago. My parents had been trying to have a kid for almost 3 years, but they couldn't. They went to different doctors, but everyone killed their hope for a bright future with kids. Anyway, they finally went to some high-class specialist in Europe, and he gave them the final diagnosis. They would never have kids. Never. At first, Mom and Dad were very upset because they both dreamed of having kids, but then they realized that money can fix it somehow. They returned to the medical center to find out if there were any girls among the patients who were planning to give up a kid. They agreed in advance to take the kids for themselves and pay a compensation to the biological mother. They didn't even reach the head doctor when they saw a woman bitterly crying in the hallway. Mom and Dad immediately approached her to ask if she needed some help, and she said the words that later became the fate of several people. That woman replied if they wanted to help her, they should take one of her kids. After all, she just found out she was going to have twins. The woman was very poor. She could hardly take one kid, and the doctor said she's going to have twins. Anyway, my parents immediately realized they could help her. They offered her a substantial reward. In fact, they bought one of her kids. Me. At the same time, they promised to help her and provide everything she needed until the moment of birth. The woman agreed without hesitation. She gave birth to 2 beautiful twin girls, who were the same as 2 peas in a pod. As agreed in advance, one was taken by my parents and the second one stayed with the woman. Surprisingly, even seeing the newborn babies, she didn't change her decision. Well, she perfectly understood she wouldn't be able to support 2 kids because she didn't have a job or a husband or parental support. As you may guess, the other girl who was sitting in my kitchen right now was my twin sister, Amber. She continued the story because after my parents bought me, they never got in touch with that woman again. They even moved to another city. Amber's childhood wasn't easy. My parents' compensation was spent to buy an apartment. Her mom could barely make ends meet, trying to feed both herself and her daughter. She was constantly searching for work. No one wanted to hire a young mom with a little kid as an employee. Once, they got lucky. Amber's mom finally found a job as a maid in some rich house. The owner of the house even allowed her to live there with her kid. Life got better. They moved out of their apartment and started renting it, getting extra income. Amber grew up in this house. She always lived surrounded by wealth and luxury, but she knew she could only look at it, and she couldn't touch it, and all these fancy things didn't belong to her. Therefore, she grew up to be envious, angry with the whole world, dreaming of one day entering that same house, but no longer being a servant, but its owner. Amber started working at 15. She was doing some odd jobs. First, she was a cocktail waitress, then a go-go dancer in nightclubs. One night, a rich and very powerful man noticed her. He invited Amber to work at his escort agency. Amber was beautiful, slender, and at the same time, she was smart and quick-witted. She quickly gained popularity among the agency's customers, so money started flowing like a river to her. Her mom was against the things Amber was doing, but she didn't care because she was finally living the life she'd always dreamed of. Meanwhile, supporting her mom, once she saw a girl who looked exactly like her in a TV commercial. She told her mom about it. Suddenly, her mom burst into tears and confessed to Amber that she had a twin sister. They were separated as kids, and there was a high chance that the girl from the commercial was her. I mean, me. Then Amber got even angrier. She was angry for her mother for doing this, and with the fact that it wasn't her on TV, but her sister who got into a rich family. And when she saw her in the photos in the article, Amber decided it was high time to meet her sister, me. I listened to Amber and my parents' stories, and just couldn't believe this was all happening to me. It seemed more like a soap opera. But the worst part was that Amber didn't just show up here. She said if we didn't start paying her a bunch of money every month, she would go and tell the story to the journalists. Most likely, they would be interested to hear such news. Of course, my parents and I couldn't let that happen, especially now when I was getting so popular every day. So, we agreed to my blackmailer sister's terms. I've been living in constant fear for 6 months in a row. I'm afraid Amber will get tired of being silent, and she'll leak the information to the journalists just for fun. Or, I'm afraid I would accidentally cross paths with one of Amber's customers at some event, and he would say he knows me in a very, private way, in front of everyone. Sometimes I think it would just be easier to tell the journalists the whole truth myself and end this story once and for all. What do you think of it? Should I continue to be blackmailed by my sister, or should I confess everything on my own? Write your answers in the comments below. I'll try to answer you back.
Hey guys, my name is Lucas, and I did a terrible thing for the sake of my friend. Instead of thanking me, my friend gave me a full-fledged life lesson that I would never forget. George and I have been friends since childhood. We had never parted since we had been in kindergarten, and it always seemed to me that I hadn't ever had such a closer friend because he was like a brother to me. And we both came from well-to-do families of the same class, so we didn't even have any conflicts. We thought in the same way. But George's parents were business people, and they often went on business trips. Then, when his younger sister was born, his dad was more often on the road, and my parents always hung out at home because they had an online business. So most of the time, George and I stayed at my place. We played video games, robbed the refrigerator, and had fun in the backyard. But we also had been coming to his place when his dad brought back a rare souvenir and stuff from his trips. It had continued this way until I was 18. You can imagine it had been this way like my whole life. Well, most of it. But once, my friendship with George was subjected to a very serious moral test. To be exact, it was only a moral test for me, of those, in which there's no correct answer. The fact is, George offered me to steal. That day, he came to visit me, but for some reason, he did not immediately sit down at the game console as we usually did on the weekends. He started telling me something. Anyway, some nonsense. I didn't even listen, but his behavior alerted me. Usually, he was calm as a rock, and now he behaved too nervously, and by his standards, it was probably a full-fledged panic. When my parents gave us some tea with my mom's pies and discussed the latest news from George and his family, they left. And my theory was totally confirmed, because George suddenly jumped up to me and said I had to help him to commit a crime. It turned out his dad wanted to leave the family. George overheard this by chance in his dad's office, and also his dad wanted to take all the money with him, not leaving them a penny. Of course, my friend did not like this idea, but what could he do? And then George remembered he knew the code for his father's safe, where his dad kept a fairly large amount of money, just in case. This money should have been enough for him and his mom for many years, exactly until George himself would be able to stand on his feet. But to get the money from his father's safe, he needed to steal them. And so that no one suspected it was George. Otherwise, it would be a failure. Now, you can imagine how I felt at that moment. On the one hand, helping a friend is a sacred thing, especially in such a delicate matter. I immediately remembered how once George was fighting shoulder to shoulder with me against the guys from another district, how he supported me when my beloved dog died, how he was there with me when it was hard. And on the other hand, theft is a completely different case, on a particularly large scale. A prison or a friendship? I honestly thought for a long time and tried to figure out the ways of not doing what George wanted to do, but unfortunately, there was no decent option. The only other way of not stealing money was cowardice and betrayal. So, I chose helping a friend. How about you? What would you choose? Write in the comments. I am Georging to hear your opinion. According to my friend's plan, my job was actually to steal the money. I should get into his dad's office, open the safe, take out all the money. And then, through the window, I should get out into the garden and run through the backyards to the abandoned house. We had one just at the end of the street. Kids had been scared with different stories about ghosts there. We should hide the money in a secret place there and go home pretending I spent all day at home. And George had to turn off the security cameras at this time and watch that his dad didn't return before I did my job, and that no one else suddenly came to the office from home. The plan was simple and ingenious. Well, everyone always has a plan. Before the operation, George repeated 10 times that he would turn off all the cameras and no one would ever see me anywhere. Then I checked again to make sure I had learned the password to the safe. I had taken my gloves and my mask, and that I was really sure of what I was doing. I was so sick of it. My nerves were broken down in such a situation. I was just waiting for us to get on the case. And we came to the big moment. On the prearranged signal, George would drop a large box that was standing on their porch and deafen half of the neighbors with that noise. I would slip through the open back door and trot into the office. I knew George's house better than my own, so I didn't have any problems with the navigation there. The safe was also easily opened, and there was money there. Lots of money, a full safe of big bucks. And in fact, it was strange because, for example, my dad keeps only some small amounts of money and my mom's jewelry at home. He thinks collecting dollars in bundles like this is both stupid and unprofitable. But then I was so panicked that someone would come and notice me that I was acting automatically and tried not to breathe or think again. I quickly put everything in a bag, closed the door behind me, and got out the window. Then I ran through the backyards as planned, found a secret place in the house, put a bag in it, covered it with some rags on top, and quickly ran home. I had almost calmed down. Even my hands stopped shaking when the police came to our house. I thought there would be an interrogation of my inner circle, and I was prepared to lie, but it turns out to be much worse. Without any questions or arguments, the police shoved some papers in my parents' face, handcuffed me, and took me to the detention places. I spent 2 months in the prison cell. It was a good thing that no one else was there at that moment. At least there was some semblance of comfort. But I didn't care about the terms. I didn't understand anything, and they didn't hurry to explain anything to me. The suspense was killing me, literally. I thought I was going mad or worse, and I couldn't imagine what had gone wrong. Honestly, for some reason, I was sure George was sitting in the next prison cell. I thought his dad had somehow figured us both out and decided to put us in jail for what we did. Or not to send us to a prison cell, just to frighten, but both. And then there was the trial, and all my illusions fell down like that avalanche. At the trial, the truth was revealed that George was there, yeah, but as a witness. He would stand there and tell me in all seriousness how I had asked him about the location of the cells, how I had been hanging around his dad's office all the time asking about thefts. I even went so far as to steal the password to the safe almost at night. Nonsense, complete nonsense. And when I was given a word, I had to say about it, and I told the version of events that I knew and in which I participated in. Well, about George's dad cheating on his wife and that George didn't want to be broke after his parents' divorce. But of course, no one believed me, or at least even tried. Unfortunately, everything was against me in that story, and the cameras clearly showed who was digging in the safe, and the lack of money in the place I indicated, even the lack of a trace of money, that was not a surprise. I was kept in the prison cell for more than 2 months. George and his dad had already sent all the money abroad many times or simply hidden it. And most important, at the time of the theft, I was just 18. That is, for the court, I was an adult, and I could assume full legal responsibility. And everyone used this fact, just throwing me in prison for a long 8 years. My parents tried to appeal, and the kids at school, teachers, and neighbors supported them. They wrote some petitions there, stood with meetings, and demanded if not to release, then at least to understand what was happening, because I would never do it. But along with me in the prison there were a lot of other guys like me who would say they were innocent. So no one believed me or my parents or their support group. And it would be all right. It was my own fault. I was a fool that I believed my friend and got caught by the police. I could have been a little bit wiser, and I should have thought before I had been participating in this kind of mischief with a clearly criminal intention. But if I decided to play a hero, I should suffer like a real hero. But I was very concerned about the question, why? Did our friendship with George mean something only to me? And all these years, he just pretended to call me his brother? You know, even sitting in jail for maybe 8 years and how I couldn't see the fact that a young boy can act a friendship during 15 years and all this was made for the sake of an insidious plan in the future, I did not believe in it, but I wanted to know the truth. When I was allowed to make calls, the first person I contacted was George. I didn't want to make a claim against him, but it was important to close the story of betrayal to an end. It tormented me, kept me awake, and the easiest way to find out the truth was to ask the person who knew it. George did not resist, although I could not hear the guilt in his voice. He honestly told me that at first, he didn't want to use me because we were friends, but his dad convinced him it would be more reliable with me. I really often hung out at their house, and the plan was simple: to persuade a trusting idiot to fake a theft from a safe, and then contact the insurance company. The fact was that George's dad had problems in his business, and the stolen amount plus insurance payments should have covered all his debts, and even something else would remain. Anyway, I was sold just for the sake of money. Yeah, of course, George's parents knew everything. No one turned off the cameras, and the money was carefully put in a safe in a sufficient quantity in advance. Then I was caught like a fly in a spider's web and was eaten by a spider. That's the story, folks. I don't know if I'll ever trust people again.
Hey guys, I'm Helen, and my head isn't my strongest point. You see, I don't have half a brain. I've always been, well, normal. I argued, I had fights with my parents, I had a cold sometimes. But that's typical, right? So I still can't understand how it all happened. At about 12, I had headaches for the first time. No, not in the sense for the first time in my life. I was sick before, but aspirin and pills from my mom's first aid kit always helped. But then it turned into a real full-blown migraine, and it wasn't an ordinary headache any longer. I lounged in bed for about a day. Then I got up and went on, doing my homework and doing the magic puzzle my grandma brought me. My parents only sympathized, but they didn't get worried, because my mom had migraines too, kinda hereditary or something. Like this video if you also have headaches, and you should go see a doctor, just in case, because actually, the head cannot hurt for no reason. Later on, from time to time, I had seizures, but not strong ones. Our family doctor said this is because of my age. Normally, it should pass after 16. Well, if it didn't work, then we all would have to blame genetics together. He advised us to walk in the fresh air more before going to bed, and I walked out in between classes. I tried not to overload myself with studies. I was only concerned with what was really interesting to me, like math. I dreamed of growing up and becoming a great scientist who would invent something very cool. For example, super cool prosthesis, or something for astronauts. I dreamt about space too, but I still liked numbers more. Add, subtract, solve puzzles. I could multiply 4-digit numbers in my mind, and all kinds of theorems were easy as pie for me. Teachers and professors promised me a wonderful future if I grew up and kept on studying. But as you know, I wasn't going to. So, migraines. The older I got, the more my head hurt. At 14, I laid in bed for at least 3 days. At 15, I went for a week or more. And at 16, just after my birthday, I went to bed and found myself in a reviving nightmare. Since then, I haven't gotten up. I simply lay in bed and couldn't move, because each movement meant another portion of pain. I can't even blink. It seemed to me my eyelashes weighed at least a ton, and I had blades built into the eyelids. Mom went to different doctors, but they all just shrugged and said migraines at my age aren't very good. But it's normal, and sometimes it happens. It seemed like the body is rebuilding itself, teenage hormonal storms and some other nonsense that my exhausted body refused to perceive. Of course, they still checked me with tests and stuff, but if you believe them, I was in normal health. And I couldn't even take my head off the pillow. Doubtful health, right? The real danger occurred when it was too late. I didn't eat, didn't sleep. I even drank water from a straw when my mom brought it. And soon the brain ceased to cope with me. I started having different kinds of funny hallucinations. The funny thing was that they relieved pain, and I even smiled sometimes. But even our family doctor understood that talking to a carpet didn't make the situation any better. They transferred me to a hospital and examined me, but the tests didn't show anything, and the doctors could not get through to my head. The fact was that after one childish prank, there was a metal needle in my spine, which meant all the attempts to cure me were equal to frying me alive. So they tried in a roundabout way, and only after removing the needles, they could understand what was going on in my skull. By that time, it was already all the same to me. The only thing I really wanted was for everything to end already. But the MRI diagnostics showed a terrible thing. The left hemisphere of my brain was literally rotting alive. Most interesting, no one could say why this was happening. The process was already at the stage when why didn't matter at all. Maybe I fell and hit my head hard, or maybe some blood clot turned the wrong way. We didn't know. The situation got urgent, and then doctors announced the sentence for me and my family. Amputation. I mean it. The doctors wanted to remove half of my brain, and at the same time, they tried to calm me down with the fact that there would be no more pain and I could continue to live on. Honestly, I had a bad idea how to live without half a brain. They scheduled the operation immediately, without removing me from the device. Like there was no other way out and stuff. And for the first time in recent years, I had a wild desire to live, so that I even thought about running away from the hospital, hiding in some hole and sitting quietly. But of course, I didn't. I can't remember how the operation passed. That is, I know I was unconscious all the time while they were tearing my brain apart. I only remember how they returned me to the ward with a bandaged head, and how my mom cried, holding my hand. I also seemed to cry. That day in the morning, my pillow was wet, and a couple of days later, after regular examinations, the doctor said the operation was successful. Now I will live a normal life or something like that, and everyone was very happy, as in the Hollywood movies, having a positive ending. Exactly until the time I had to get out of the bed. It turned out I can't do such a simple action. I just don't know how. Can you imagine, for example, you don't know how to breathe or use your limbs? Neither could I until it happened. It seemed to be a familiar action. You move one leg, then the second one, and then move your limbs forward to the desired point. Hell no. I really had to think about my every move, and then, if it weren't for my mom, I would have probably fallen right at the doctor's feet. But then again, they tried to convince me. These are just the primal consequences of the operation, and soon everything would pass. Looking ahead, I would say, no, it wouldn't. My migraines totally disappeared. If we take them into account, then yeah, I feel much better now. But with them, I lost a minimum of half my memory. I don't know how to do elementary actions, like simple movements, or bring a spoon to my mouth, and some memories from the past were lost too, as if someone had pressed a button and just erased a part of me. It's awful, honestly. But this isn't the end of my story. Now I live in a wheelchair, and I almost reconnect to my close people. It's curious I remember my mom perfectly, but I don't remember my dad. My dad and I have to meet almost every evening, and every time he has to introduce himself and prove he's my dad. The same thing happened with my friends. Some stayed in my head and some didn't. For some reason, I thought it was an omen. So here, my friends and I walked around the park and talked. Mom let me go, because it wasn't far from the house, and she trusted my friends. So they took the opportunity to just talk to me, remember something, and give moral support. By chance, a dude appeared next to us, who painted fast portraits for tourists. Well, you've probably seen such people with portable easels and pictures. They live in any tourist place. I listened to my friends, and I watched the artist working, and for some reason, I knew I could do better. And this was despite the fact I had never been interested in anything creative in my life. That is, even in my childhood, I loved cubes, and I hated coloring. And that day, I suddenly started painting. The artist and I argued a bit about lines and colors. I have no idea where it all came from in my head. And we made a bet. If I could paint his portrait, he would give me all his tools, like paints and canvas. If not, then I'll give him the price they cost, $200. I agreed. My friends wanted to intervene, but unexpectedly for everyone, including myself, I picked up a pencil and in 3 minutes sketched up the face of the artist. And then I added some pastel colors, shades, and volumes. It was a real shock for everyone, including me. In my opinion, I had the biggest shock of everyone, but my sketch was too real. Well, like some kind of a photo with slight distortions, but it perfectly repeated even some small wrinkles. My friends started shouting I was hiding a genius within. The artist shook my hand and gave me all his tools as promised. The crowd started applauding me, and some were shooting me on the phone. I started crying because, well, what's the point of an artist's talent suddenly awakening in me if I can't remember my dad? I can't walk. I can't even eat normally on my own and not throw some mess on my knees. What's the point of all these brushes and paints? Of course, I didn't take my prize, though the artist really insisted. He was saying something about honesty and dignity, but even a fool could understand that all this stuff was too expensive. And that dude in the park would be left without a single penny if he lost his drawing tools. We just said goodbye to him and walked on. Later, my friends asked me to paint their portraits. Just like that, for the sake of our friendship. Then, in almost the same miraculous way, I played the violin against the background of a stunned musician. I recited verses or composed poems on the spot. I did other strange things. But for my mathematical, numbers-loving character, such changes looked like an insult, because I became an absolute failure in math. Absolute! The letters now would crawl themselves into my head, but the numbers were always scattered around. I could no longer multiply or do some other things. They were just too complicated for me. I still dream of physics, math, maybe some scientific discoveries. But I can't do that. I can only draw, play musical instruments, and act like a very talented girl. And I don't want to be talented. I want science. But unfortunately, I cannot change that. Now, this is my life. I live the life of a very creative and talented person, having the heart of a mathematician. And at the same time, I'm incapable of some simple actions. And you know, I'll say a very bad thing, but it would have been better if the doctors didn't save me then, because I'm not happy to be a stranger to myself. Write in the comments if similar stories ever happened to you or your friends. Share my video and support me with likes. Take care of your head, because along with a part of the brain, I lost myself. See you.